We're here with Darren Stephenson, the first place of the UK Worlds race, and we're basically just going to be talking all about the process and stuff and the world point system itself. So I guess just very briefly, how's it feel to be there now that you've is that settled in?
Yeah, no. It's good that it's finally over. The journey itself was so full of ups and downs. To actually choose to do the journey is one thing, and then have the bottle to go through with it. It's really hard because there's a lot of moments where when I first started it, I started off really with disappointing results at a lot of regionals. But I pursued and I managed to get a lot of high finishes, a lot of regionals, which accumulated a lot of points. It started to get. The worst it got was when it got near the end, when I started to get ahead and then having to maintain a lead. That's when it started to feel the most stressful. Because when you're behind, you just when you're playing catch up, there's not much pressure on you, and you're just kind of oh, if I catch him, I catch him. But when I eventually caught my competitor, it started to sink in. I was oh my god, it's in my hands now, and it's down to me whether to just keep it going. And the World's race is an amazing thing, but it is really stressful as well.
So for the World's race itself, you obviously did a lot of traveling, and you kind of started a little bit late. What was the actual process through the whole year? Where did you start out? And obviously you ended up in America. So what was the whole process that you went through personally?
Yeah. So when I started to, obviously I wanted to start at the start of the year because it's always been my goal to go to the World Championships. So when I started, like I said, I didn't start off very well. UK regionals. Jawad, Luke and JY started to get ahead of me, and I was starting to wonder whether I even wanted to pursue with the race to begin with because I was just so far behind. And then I topped London and Prague, which gave me a few points, which were the bulk of my points in the UK anyway. And I had a solid 100 before I went to America, and I think JY was on 250 or something like that. So I thought, well. But going into America, I was clueless as to how many points I actually gave out. I thought it was a 64 per regional, something crazy like that. So I was I'll top 2 US regionals, that'd be fine. But when I went, it was completely different to what I expected. There's a lot of 32 point regionals, 24 point regionals. They're not all 64 pointers. It's not a case of I just do well at 2 US regionals and I've suddenly caught them. It took a lot of grinding to get there, and I also had to top a few YCSs along the way as well. So
you topped a few, some of the bigger regionals have a couple of hundreds, did they not? Or did you go to any massive
points or people?
Points.
No, the max you get was 64, and I only ever ended 2 64s. And
is that the cap on regionals? 64.
Okay. So the points don't get any more than 64 points, and you're still going to finish quite high to get those 64 points. And there was only 2 regionals that I entered that were 64 points. One of which I completely scrubbed and got 0 points. I got 65th at that. So I got 0 points. And there was another one that I came 20th or something. I can't remember, but the bulk of which were mostly 32 pointers. That was the most common one, especially when the format's more defined. Because when I started regional grinding, it was pendulum format where it was more defined, so the attendance was getting really, really low. So some ones that were guaranteed 48 points went to 32 points, and some ones that were usually guaranteed 32 got knocked down to 24. Because they don't go by number of participants, they go by they don't divide it by 8 like they do here. They have sections, and if it lies in a certain domain, that's how many points they allocate. So when a regional doesn't hit 200 it usually does, then it gives 24 points instead. And then that made me have to grind more, because regionals that I was expecting more points didn't give out as many. So when I was finishing in the top 8, I was getting only 2/3 of the amount of points that I would have used, that I thought I would have got. So it made the grind a bit harder.
Okay, so it's quite a long process, and going into the actual system itself, I don't know where you want to begin with this, but obviously you're from the UK, and you're pretty much having to go to a whole other continent just to secure your place. So, how do you feel about that? Like, is that good, or what's like? Is there room for improvements there?
Yeah, like I feel like to actually qualify, I felt like that's what I had to do. I feel like I didn't have a choice but to go to America, because I saw that back door in the world, so to speak. Because the main competitor, JY, has the time to go to most regionals every weekend. He goes to 2 of which. And me being from Newcastle, it's just really difficult to like compete with that. So like instead of like committing a whole year to having to go to UK regionals every weekend, which produced barely any points at all, I felt like it was necessary to try and catch them by committing 3 or 4 months of my time to go to bigger regionals and to try and catch them up that way. I felt like that was more like, that was better for me to invest my time into, as opposed to going to little ones every weekend. But like, even though I had to do that, the World's Race is like still such an amazing thing. Having a way to like make the whole season worth something, and to get you like one of the biggest like achievements that people are after is to go to the World Championships, is really good. Because before the World point system, I would always not bother with regionals because I didn't really see a point, and I would just go to YCSs. And especially good in Europe, because especially since we only get 4, it feels like our season only lasts from like end of August until February, until we'll have a nationals. But since we have the World's point system, even if we don't get a YCS from between February and August, we still have regionals that we can grind if you're still in the World's Race, just to go to those regionals and accumulate points. Especially since UK Nationals is at the very end, where that can make a huge difference on the World's Race system. But like, obviously, it has its flaws.
Yeah, so you mentioned all the good points about it, and the fact that when we do have that sort of drought for major events before nationals, you can grind all the regionals for those extra points you need. But talking more about like the sort of the continental differences, and the fact that you can earn points outside of not just your country, which I suppose some people would say is fine, but earning points outside of your continent. How do you feel about that? Do you think that's something that needs change? Is it all right, or?
In terms of like regionals, probably. It does seem a bit daft that like someone could just commit a few months of their time and they have to go to American regionals, whereas like the American point system is more or less perfect because they live in America, so everyone's on an equal playing field. And the only thing that's not perfect about that is if you're Canadian. But the guy who came first is Canadian, so I guess it doesn't matter too much. But for people that live in Europe, there's always the possibility of like not being able to go to America, and then you get beat by your competition that just goes to America. Not to mention they get more YCSs than us as well. So if you were to say, for example, you don't get any points outside your continent, full stop, then what's the point of like European players qualifying for a YCS other than the win? Because like it feels like a big investment to try and go just to get a win. Whereas if you go and you're in the World's Race, even if you don't win, you still get points. So that's something to like fall back on. Because when I went to YCSs over there, I was coming short of like wins or whatever, but at least I got points, so I could walk away with that at the very least. And but in terms of regionals as well, there's a lot of points that get given out for regionals in comparison to a YCS. Like you can get like top 10 at a regional and get more points for getting top 32 at a YCS, and I just think that's crazy. I feel like the ratio isn't like really good for that. You can change that by making like regionals more meaningful, by like if somebody from Europe goes to an American regional, that means they can only get points if they get top 8, so it means that they took the risk and they've said to themselves, right, I have to top 8 to get points, and if they do get top 8 at the points, then fair enough. But if they get like 11th and they still get points, it seems a bit off.
So you think that Europeans should, and Americans vice versa, should be able to get points at each other's regionals, at the regional level?
Not necessarily.
As long as they top.
Yeah, I think if they like have a high finish at those regionals, then who am I to say that they don't deserve the points? It just gets a bit like stupid how like if you go to a 32 pointer and you come 22nd, you get about 10 points. And in the UK, if you come first, you can get like 3. And it's just a ridiculous difference that they do need to address. But my main concern isn't so much the regionals; it's the difference in points that you get at a YCS and you do regionals or UK nationals.
So just before we get onto the YCS factor, I just want to kind of focus on the regional part. A lot of people would maybe make the argument and say that the world's race is very much pay to win for Europeans if you're able to make the journey to America. Do you agree with that aspect? Because it is not cheap at all. And people who do top in America from Europe at their regionals, like you said, that's deserved and stuff. But it is very much a case of you could be the best player in Europe for that season, and because you just didn't have the money or time to go to American regionals, should that maybe be addressed?
Yeah, I feel like no matter how the point system is, the person with the most time and money at their disposal is probably going to go anyway. Because if you make it exclusive to the UK, for example, the person with the more time is probably going to go, because imagine if we can only get points in the UK, that means the person who goes to regionals back to back every weekend is just going to go.
But do you think that's bad?
It depends. If that person's had like a solid season, then no. But if that person just has topped regionals back to back and not performed well at a YCS, and then you have a person who doesn't have the time but has performed really well at the YCSs, but just can't keep up with the person going to regionals because they can't attend them because they have work or something. It's weird because so if you make it exclusively to the UK, the person with the most time can just go to 2 regionals a weekend, but the person who has a job can't realistically do a regional every weekend, but they'll get time off for YCSs. So let's say that person tops all of the European YCSs but has no time for regionals whatsoever, but the person who goes is the person who performed well at regionals every weekend. And I don't really feel like that's particularly fair, but that's something that could happen if you just made it exclusively the UK.
So one way you could look at it is just before we move on to YCSs, it's kind of like a spectrum where you could have on one extreme you have someone could argue if you're from the UK, you should never be allowed to have any points outside of the UK regionals and the YCS, and then on the very opposite other extreme is you should be able to earn points absolutely anywhere. So I guess where we're putting you is somewhere round about in the middle, where primarily YCSs should take precedence. And some regionals are okay outside of Europe. Yeah,
there's definitely some sort of middle ground somewhere, because at the way it is now, if you go one extreme and leave it the way it is, then the person with the most time and money is going to go. But it's not a more of pay to win sort of thing. You're paying just to give yourself the opportunity, because a person could have all the time and money in the world but still be really bad at the game and not do very well. But if you play constantly, then your technical play does just get better over time. I performed so well this season because I was just playing every weekend. And last year when JY was going to regional every weekend, his technical play was getting really good as well. So he deserved to go just because he was playing every weekend and his technical play was probably one of the best in the UK. And I feel like playing every weekend does help.
Okay, so moving on to the YCS part. Currently, how much do YCSs give? We know that Konami doubled it. I don't know the exact numbers. 128 for a win? 60?
No, it's 32 if you top, and then it scales between first and 32nd. So first gets an extra 32, 32nd gets an extra point.
So YCSs essentially give 64?
If you win, yeah.
If you win, okay. So the idea is that I think that they're trying to reward constant attendance at regionals more than the major events. But obviously, you take a bit of an issue with the YCS point distribution. Yep.
Yeah, from a competitive perspective, not so much the casual one. The world's point system's for the competitive players. It's good that regionals have gotten more attendance recently, and that's really good. But if you just compare like what you get at a YCS and what you get at like some American regionals and UK Nats, for example, I just don't think it's particularly fair. Like you can come first at a YCS and get 64 points, and you can get top 64 at UK Nationals and get 90. And I don't really feel like top 64 of a UK National should be worth more than a YCS win. I feel like a YCS win should definitely get like more rewarded in terms of points. But obviously you do have to be careful with how you distribute the points still, because on one hand that person could have just did a one-off win and never do well again, but then still go because that one win is like pushed them over the edge. But like I would like to think you can kind of distribute points to YCSs like you do at UK Nats. So like the winner will get like 128, and then it's spread between like 128 to like 1, somewhere like that. Because I think like topping a YCS not this season but last season, you could get 1 point for getting top 32 and then getting knocked out, which I think is crazy. Whereas now the minimum you can get 33, sorry. And I definitely think that does need to be addressed, because somebody who can like top a load of YCSs in a year could like not go when they really deserve it.
Okay, so you think that they should probably like increase the point distribution at YCSs to around about the national level? Do you think they should address nationals at all?
Nah, because you still want nationals to feel like a big deal, and nationals is a sort of like catch-up event for Europe. So like if you don't have your invite, you go to nationals to get your invite. And I think it's important to have those 128 invites, like points aside, and obviously the points are like hand in hand with whatever invites you have. So I think reducing the amount of points that you get at nationals would just lower the prestige in it even further. And like it was kind of like a good thing in a way, like that it came down to how well either me or JY did well at UK Nats, but it was still really stressful nonetheless. But that's from like an inside perspective how stressful it was. From an outside perspective, I imagine it was like interesting to watch. But yeah, I do think UK Nationals having 128 is pretty high, but it should stay the same for what it is. I think it just means that YCSs need to like have like something similar, if not more.
So just the final point is like Worlds itself. Some people would maybe criticize the setup of Worlds as maybe being a bit of a kind of like a glorified locals. On the other hand, you know, you could argue that it's supposed to be this really prestigious event with like not a lot of people, but literally the best of the best. But regardless, there are still a lot of really good players who don't get to go, who had really good seasons and stuff because of the limited amount of spots. Do you think that the capacity should be increased at all, or is there any sort of thing that you would maybe change about the structure of Worlds itself?
I think that's just the harsh reality of competition, I think. Like, if you watch football, sometimes the better team doesn't win. Like, they just weren't good on the day, I suppose. In terms of increasing the number, they've already done that by allowing this Worlds race. And like, if they increase it any further, I think it'll just reduce the prestige of like you say, of Worlds itself. Like, people were talking about making it bigger, like so it's like 6 rounds. Then it would just become like not as like of a big deal. Like, remember, like I think you used to have to qualify for nationals back in the day, and then that got you an invite to Euros. Now nobody cares. It doesn't mean anything. Like, you get your invite accidentally sometimes. Whereas, like, imagine if like Worlds became like that. It would just suck. Like, for Pokemon, like, you can get your invite by like getting like a certain number of points or something. Where so like I'm not that massively clued up on like the Pokemon game, but like I'm sure it's not a massive big deal to qualify for Pokemon Worlds. You just have to put the time in, and then you get enough points, and you get to go. Whereas like Yu-Gi-Oh! Worlds is just something that's just sought after by everyone, and can take, and like not many amazing players out there haven't even been to Worlds yet, and that does suck because like they do have a right to go, but that's just the way it is, unfortunately.
All right. Well, this has been a bit of a Worlds insight for Darren here, one of the UK competitors. he'll be representing his country, obviously, and E-Man Games as well. You'll be going with a teammate. What is that like? Having a teammate, but not also a teammate, but one of your closest friends as well is going. In the end, there's still competition because it's such a small event. Does that change the dynamic at all, or?
It's more than I can imagine, to be honest. I never really looked past what would happen if I did qualify for Worlds, because it just felt like a dream. I just wanted to go for it and say that I actually went for it, and if I didn't get it, then I didn't get it. Whoever goes, as far as I'm concerned, is the guy who deserves it. But now that I can look ahead of Worlds itself, because now that I've got it, it just seems surreal. I think I just imagined that I would have to test by myself. But since I've been doing this Worlds race and stuff, I've made so many pals along the way. Being picked up by E-Man as well, being able to test with Josh, who's also a Worlds competitor, is really, really good. And also Luke winning Euros, that was beyond my wildest dreams as well. Having someone from the UK going, I really hoped it would happen, but for it to actually happen, it's just wow, it's insane. Being able to have a testing circle to go to Worlds is just I don't know, it's crazy. It's more than I could possibly comprehend.
Yeah, so it sounds really exciting, and this is hopefully give you some insight into the Worlds process itself, and just looking at some of the good and the bad. So thanks, Darren, for doing this, and comment, like, and subscribe as always, and until next time.
See ya.